Some horror movies scare you, some disgust you, but once in a while a movie comes along that makes entire governments panic, that has critics walking out of screenings, that blurs the line between cinema, pornography, and performance art. In 1973, a small crew shooting at Cinecittà Studios in Rome turned the world's most famous monster story inside out. This wasn't the Victorian Gothic of Mary Shelley. This was a blood-soaked, sexually transgressive nightmare projected in 3D, branded with Andy Warhol's name, and described by one British paper as a desecration masquerading as art. It would be banned in multiple countries, labeled obscene in others, and whispered about for decades on bootleg tapes and in horror conventions. This is the full story of Flesh for Frankenstein, the movie that made Frankenstein a dirty word. By the early 1970s, Andy Warhol's factory had already shocked mainstream America with underground films like Chelsea Girls and Trash. Warhol's brand meant danger, decadence, and a wink at society's taboos. When producer Carlo Ponti wanted to bankroll an outrageous reimagining of the Frankenstein story for the European market, attaching Warhol's name was a marketing masterstroke. In reality, Warhol did not direct Flesh for Frankenstein. Paul Morrissey, one of Warhol's regular collaborators, sat in the director's chair. But the association gave the film an aura of underground authenticity and a guarantee of controversy before a single frame had been shot. Filmed at Italy's legendary Cinecittà Studios, Flesh for Frankenstein assembled an oddball mix of European actors, Warhol regulars, and Italian technicians. Udo Kier, a German actor then building a reputation for eccentric art house roles, played Baron Frankenstein with wild-eyed camp and genuine menace. Delilah Di Lazzaro played the Baroness, both his wife and sister embodying the incestuous decadence of the Frankenstein family. Joe D'Alessandro, Warhol's own muse and factory star, was cast as Nicholas, the sexually virile stable boy whose body becomes a literal battleground for the Baron's experiments. Working with a relatively small budget, Morrissey and his effects crew went for practical realism. They used animal offal from local slaughterhouses, handmade prosthetics, and clever camera tricks to create the illusion of real dismemberment and necrophilia. Because the film was shot in 3D, the gore seemed to leap out at audiences, increasing its shock factor. Unlike classic Frankenstein films, Morrissey's version openly eroticized death and science. Baron Frankenstein's goal is not merely to create life, but to engineer a new Serbian race that will obey him completely. To achieve this, he sews together male and female bodies, lusts over his creations, and utters the now infamous line, "To know death, Otto, you have to far out life." In the gallbladder. The movie is filled with imagery unheard of in mainstream horror at the time. Explicit incestuous undertones between the Baron and Baroness. Prolonged shots of dissected bodies with entrails spilling toward the 3D camera. Sexualized violence, including the Baron's attempts to have intercourse with his stitched-together creatures. A nihilistic ending in which the Baron's creations rise up against him in a tableau of blood and betrayal. For 1973 audiences used to the relatively tame Hammer horror films, this was beyond shocking. Critics accused it of being pornography dressed as art. Religious groups picketed theaters. Governments acted fast. Baron von Frankenstein neglects his duties towards his wife's sister Katrin, as he is obsessed with creating a perfect Serbian race to obey his commands, beginning by assembling a perfect male and female from parts of corpses. The doctor's sublimation of his sexual urges by his powerful urge for domination is shown when he utilizes the surgical wounds of his female creation to satisfy his lust. Frankenstein is dissatisfied with the inadequate reproductive urges of his current male creation and seeks a head donor with a greater libido. He also repeatedly exhibits an intense interest in the creature's nasum, nose, has a correctly Serbian shape. As it turns out, suitably randy farmhand Nicholas, leaving a local brothel along with his sexually repressed friend, brought there in an unsuccessful attempt to dissuade him from entering a monastery, are spotted and waylaid by the doctor and his henchman, Otto. Mistakenly assuming that the prospective monk is also suitable for stud duty, they take his head for use on the male creature. Not knowing these behind-the-scenes details, Nicholas survives and is summoned by Katrine to the castle, where they form an agreement that he will gratify her unsatisfied carnal appetites. Under the control of Frankenstein, the male and female creatures are seated for dinner with the castle's residents, but the male creature shows no signs of recognition of his friend as he serves the doctor and his family. At this point, Nicholas realizes something is awry, but he pretends not to recognize his friend's face until he can investigate further. After a falling out with Katrin, who is merely concerned with her own needs, Nicholas snoops into the laboratory and is captured by the doctor. Frankenstein muses about using his new acquisition to replace the head of his creature, who still shows no signs of libido. Nevertheless, Katrin is rewarded for betraying Nicholas by being granted use of the creature for erotic purposes, but is killed during a bout of overly vigorous copulation. Meanwhile, Otto repeats the doctor's sexual exploits with the female creature, resulting in her graphic disembowelment. Frankenstein returns and, enraged, does away with Otto. When he attempts to have the male creature eliminate Nicholas, however, the remnants of his friend's personality rebel, and the doctor is killed in a gruesome fashion. The creature, believing he is better off dead, then disembowels himself. Frankenstein's children, Eric and Monica, then enter the laboratory and turn the wheel of the crane, holding Nicholas in midair. To his surprise, the crane lifts him higher into the air as the children prepare scalpels. The movie's journey through international censorship boards is almost as dramatic as the film itself. United Kingdom refused a cinema certificate upon release. Only after heavy cuts was it allowed a limited run. The uncut version remained banned for over a decade. Australia, banned outright until the late 1980s, even then released with significant cuts. USA received the ultra-rare X rating from the MPAA, a label usually reserved for hardcore porn. This limited its distribution, but cemented its legend among underground filmgoers. Italy, released uncut but attacked by Catholic groups as blasphemous. Some local authorities tried to block screenings. Each ban only increased its notoriety. The line between exploitation and art had rarely been so blurry. Even today, film historians argue over Morrissey's intentions. Was Flesh for Frankenstein a sincere attempt to critique aristocratic decadence, totalitarian eugenics, and the commodification of bodies, or was it simply a freak show designed to cash in on gore and sex? Supporters point out that the film is full of absurd, deadpan humor and over-the-top performances, suggesting it was meant as a grotesque satire. Detractors argue that the camera lingers too lovingly on mutilation and sexual violence to be anything but exploitative. This ongoing debate has helped keep the film alive in academic circles long after many other video nasties faded from memory. Despite the censorship, Flesh for Frankenstein became a cult hit. Midnight screenings and underground VHS copies kept it in circulation throughout the 1980s. Its companion piece, Blood for Dracula, 1974, cemented the Warhol horror duo and influenced later filmmakers from John Waters to Lars von Trier. It also paved the way for later shock films Cannibal Holocaust, Caligula, a Serbian film that combined sexual taboo and graphic violence. Today, it's studied in film schools as an example of transgressive cinema in the politics of censorship. In 2013, the uncut 3D version was restored and shown at film festivals, drawing new audiences who couldn't believe something this extreme had been made 40 years earlier. Half a century later, Flesh for Frankenstein still stands as one of the strangest, most audacious horror films ever made. It's grotesque, it's camp, it's obscene, and it's unforgettable. It's a reminder that cinema can provoke not just fear or disgust, but outrage and moral debate, and that sometimes what society tries hardest to ban tells us the most about our own taboos. If you want to keep exploring the banned, censored, and buried movies that rewrote cinema's rulebook, follow this channel. We're diving into them one by one, exposing the history, the controversy, and the legacy that refuses to die.